In this last of the three videos on reading Alice Baumgartner's South to Freedom, I'm going to talk about the kind of how do you fill in what's in between when you read the outside in method. Of course, the idea is that you don't need to read every word in a book to understand its main ideas, to think about the sources the author has used, and to evaluate their use of sources to present a certain narrative and a certain interpretation. And so that's, again, what we're talking about here. I'm talking about a book, but it can be done with an article, as you're doing this week. So once I had read the introduction and the epilogue, and I had taken some notes, I then went to chapter 1. And I generally do kind of read chapter by chapter unless I have a very specific topic or question that I'm trying to answer by reading a book. But if I'm just reading the book to get a sense of what all is there and what all it says in terms of making its argument, rather than as a reference point, I read 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I should have mentioned this, and I'll mention this in the post that I write. But of course, this is the way I do things. I just wanted to share that with you all, so that you see I'm engaging in this work too, and this is how I've kind of come to do it after years and years and years of working in history. It's not necessarily the right way to do it. You have to find what works for you best, but hopefully this will be helpful. So as I mentioned, I went to chapter 1. It's titled Defending Slavery. And with this chapter, because I was just getting into the book, and I know that she has these 3 narrative threads, as I read in the introduction, about why did the U.S. come to have laws that protect slaveholding? Why does Mexico come to have laws that protect escaped slaves and try to give them, or actually do legally give them their freedom? And then the third one is, what are the voices of these enslaved people who fled from bondage in the United States to Mexico? So those are 3 things I'm expecting to see here. But I haven't really gotten a feel for her writing yet, so I decided to more or less just read through chapter 1. If there were some contextual things that I already had a pretty good sense of, so for example, in the first few paragraphs, she summarizes the context of the Civil War and the political infighting that led to the creation of the Republican Party, to Abraham Lincoln's election, and so on. Since I knew some of that already, and she was just providing context so that we would understand the story she's telling more specifically in the chapter, I skimmed through some of that part. But then she started talking about the Kirkham family. They were a slaveholding family in Louisiana. She's going to talk about both James and John Kirkham. They were brothers, related. This family had a long history in this area. And so I kind of look at the way she's telling their story to help understand the roots, the foundation of this notion that in the United States, even with the Constitution, Congress came to this point where it was protecting the rights of slaveholders over the rights of the enslaved. She also gives us some context on Mexican history, so we can understand that laws that provided freedom to escaped slaves from other empires wasn't something that started when Mexico gained independence, but it was something that ran deeper. So I read through that chapter, got those main ideas, and I added them at the back to my notes section that I was showing you. So everything that in the very beginning is over on this side. What I was doing in chapter 1 is up here, and then my shorthand for chapter 2 is on the second half of this page. Again, you can't read that, I know, but just to show you the way I do this. And you could write it in a separate notebook if you wanted to. Even if you're reading digitally, you could do that. I spent a lot of time talking about chapter 1, but when I got to chapter 2, I decided to, on that chapter, use the outside-in method. And so she doesn't use headings, but she has page breaks where she has different sections of text. And so I read the first section that talks about Martin and a group of enslaved people who went with him. He was an enslaved person on the Kirkham plantation, she talks about them escaping, what the plans were, and I was really looking closely at what sources she was using for that, and I found that she had some deposition records from they were Mexican records that were then housed in an archive in the United States, that tell the story from the escaped enslaved people's perspective about, well, how did you get away, and how are you in Mexico, when they were applying in Mexico to have their freedom recognized. So that's an interesting type of document that's available because Dr. Baumgartner is looking across the border to what's going on in Mexico and not just what's happening with enslaved peoples in the United States. So I'm seeing the three, or I'm going to be looking for those three narrative threads in chapter 2. But I read that first section to get, here's the story she's talking about. When I get to the end, I found that she's talking about Moses Austin and James Kirkham again. Apparently their paths crossed when Austin went to petition the government in Mexico about getting the right to colonize in Texas. They traveled together. They went before the Mexican governor. It was the Spanish governor at that time in San Antonio in Tejas, together. And while Austin was asking for that permission to bring colonists, Kirkham was trying to get his slaves back. He had gone to track down Martin and the others. I'm calling him Martin because it comes from the Mexican sources, but it's probably his name was probably Martin. And so, so again, they have very different purposes for being there in front of the governor, even though their paths crossed. And it helps us to connect to this bigger story about what's going on with Mexican law, what's going on with American law, and how the stories of Kirkham, Austin, and Martin help us to see this argument that she's making. At that point, then I went back through and I read topic sentences to skim, and I would stop if I kind of got lost, and read a little bit more deeply, or go back and catch up. If I missed a point or something. But where I understood how the story was progressing, I just kept skimming through topic sentences and got through the chapter that way. All right. I like this book, so I told you more of the story about it as I was trying to really focus on reading strategies, but hopefully these ideas and strategies help. And at this point, I'm only through the first 2 chapters. I've spent a little over 2 hours with this book. At this point, using these kinds of strategies and methods, but I already have a pretty strong sense of what it's about, what the arguments are, what kinds of sources there are, and how well these arguments seem to be coming together. So far, so good. I look forward to reading the rest. I hope that your reading is going well. Please let me know if you have questions, comments, concerns, you're getting stuck, these strategies aren't working, whatever it might be. I'm always happy to help. And I'll talk to you soon.